it gets to be 6, we'll start, whether people are here or not. Not much to miss in the beginning, so. Patrick's recording, so I suppose we should at least attempt to.
Check on 3. Check on 3.
City council might not want to come back in this room for a while.
Oh, really?
Tim, what number is yours?
5.
You might have hit their allotment of hours in June.
They've had some long meetings, huh?
Couple in a row.
Long meetings.
Long for us.
Not more meetings, just longer meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is 6 o'clock. Let's call the special meeting of the Grand Marais Planning Commission to order. So let the record show that Stacy, Michael, McHugh, and myself are here, along with Mike as staff.
And I'm Jeff Miller. I'm with HKGi, the consultant working on this project.
So, I don't know, are you going to start this out? Or is
Yep, I'm going to
Jeff
start
gonna
it. He's going to take it over and do most of it.
Okay.
So I'll just start by reminding people what we're doing here, right? We have this project, and we hired HKGi to help us, and the subject of our project is housing in Grand Marais. The first phase of that project was to do some data collection and put together a housing inventory and some maps. And the main purpose, what we're going to spend most of our time on at this meeting, is looking at the preliminary results of all of that. We've got the data that they were able to collect and the maps, and Jeff will go over that for us. And then just a couple ideas about that. The data is intended to help us go through evaluating different issues with housing and potential ideas of things we want to work on with housing. In order to accomplish that, it's not important that it's 100% accurate, and there are some parts of it that just aren't, and because of the sources of it. And in order for us to get it from good to perfect, might not be worth the investment of resources, and that's something that we'll have to think about as we're looking at the data. Is it useful in this form, or does it need to be modified in some way? After we've done this step, we have a couple other steps that HKGi is also reviewing our ordinances and documents, and he'll talk a little bit about their preliminary findings with that. And there'll be some more work there that for us to maybe help them or direct them to. And then we'll come back and have a workshop with some other community players where we'll take all this information that we've gathered and go through a process where we try and come up with things that we might want to work on when it comes to housing. And we'll open that up broadly to ideas and then work our way through prioritization until we've come up with a list of tasks that we're actually willing to do. So the stage we're at tonight is look at the maps and data. And with that, I'm just going to pass it on to Jeff, and he can take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So this is kind of what we're going to cover: presentation of the housing and inventory data and the maps. So I'll go over that during the first part of the meeting. And we're looking at existing housing inventory, but also vacant land that's guided for residential or zoned for residential. And then, as Mike said, we'll talk about preliminary findings that we've identified so far, and then open it up to you to give us input on what we presented, and then try to get at some preliminary issues that you think we should be targeting as we move to the next step. But you're more than welcome to ask questions or make comments while I'm presenting. I'm going to try to do two things on this screen. So let's see. First, I'm going to go over the maps, and I'm going to use these first, but they are up here digitally, so if we get to some kind of more specific question, we can zoom in and look at things and see if we're finding things that don't make sense.
Thanks.
So for the existing housing inventory, that includes 8 maps. So all the types of housing properties in the city, just homestead properties, we have those mapped. Just non-homestead properties, seasonal residential recreational properties, a couple short-term rental maps, a property values map, and then a tax exempt properties. So I think from
Should we gather around?
Okay.
yeah,
We're small enough.
yeah, if you want to come up here, we can look at these closer. We printed them so that they'd be easier to see. So if you had this size or smaller, or your screen, it's kind of hard to see, yeah. So, so the first one is all the housing types, and I'll keep saying this hopefully, but properties, not units. So an apartment building property will just count as one, mostly on these maps and in these numbers.
Is that identified by the tax ID number, each individual
Yeah,
one? Or-
yeah,
Okay.
yep, yep, it's based on the tax ID or the parcel,
First, okay.
yep.
And so you have all of those, and these are tax classifications, which,
Tax class codes, yeah.
yes, which
Yeah,
is
there's a million of
not
them.
not understandable to understand if that's a one unit, or whether it's rental, or whether it's just,
Well, we're trying to understand that with these, so,
Okay.
well, that's partly what we're gonna explain
I
tonight.
mean, looking at it, you know, my first blush look at it was that, okay, I see all these classifications, but I don't understand what
Yeah.
I'm seeing, so.
Yep, we're trying to simplify that, so I can't remember which maps we sent out first, but I don't think we had these split out, right? With the
No.
homestead,
No,
non-homestead.
we did have this one.
You had this
Yeah,
one.
this
But it was labeled a little different.
Yeah, so this shows everything, and you're right, these are the class codes in the county's data. And so this is showing the number of properties, not units. So about 700 properties are residentially classified
Okay.
in Grand Marais. And then,
So
you
when
know,
you're saying in Grand Marais, is that in this,
it's this one right here,
okay, within the city limits? Okay.
Yep. the wiggly line over
Yep,
there.
Okay, so not the
And then
Stones.
this area of interest is, we just felt like for context,
Yep.
to see what's right next to the city, because, you know, long-term, there's some of those properties are going to come into the city, possibly, if there is an annexation or some need to expand. So, you know, this isn't a magic line, it's just, that's what we're showing, is 167 properties outside of the city on this map. So that's the total. Yeah, and then these are those classifications. So we tried to make that easier by splitting things out. So homestead properties, or generally owner-occupied properties, are on this map only. So we got rid of those, just to try to see things better. So homesteaded properties are either 1 unit, or what they call 1 to 3 units. Those are almost all single units, even though they say 1 to 3 units.
What does that mean, like a duplex or something, or?
Could,
We're not sure why they classify it that way. We think they're almost all, maybe all, single-family homes, even though they're calling that tax class code residential 1 to 3 units.
Well, I mean, I think I understand that, because, you know, the house where Kelsey lives, that has a single-family home and 2 cabins on that property. It's classified as homestead property,
oh,
but there's also it's kind of one of those tricky
Yeah.
So,
classifications.
do you see it on this map?
yeah, could you find it on this? Is it a large
Well,
one?
I don't know, this is a little confusing because it shows something in between that I'm not sure really exists, so.
Oh, it's non-residential, is what this is saying. So anything that's not colored is commercial or
Yeah,
something else.
It's a little bit confusing because it's not the corner property, it's the one down from the corner. And it actually comes down to take that lot in, and then this next one is the Blue Water property. Dan Riddle's property, and
So should we
below that is
you want to circle
the
that just to look at that, or?
old North Shore building. So
I think you're a block to the east on that. I mean, that stuff that's Dan Riddle's property right there, this white one.
oh, so
That's
this-
Kelsey's
this-
That's
right
what I
there. This
noticed.
one.
This says
so
first
that's-
down here and it's second up here, and it gets
It's
confusing.
first.
What
Oh, okay, yep,
that
we need,
it got
there's a problem.
confusing for me when
Oh,
I was
that's-
like, where are we? Where am I
Oh.
looking?
Yeah.
But
And
the
that was in
labels
the wrong
are
spot.
not
We
correct.
should mark
Okay,
that.
well, that's Anton's house right there.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
So that should be,
okay. Okay, so that probably is right. So this is residential, so then it takes in, basically, it's this piece right here.
so it is showing up correctly, it's
Yeah, I was
homesteaded,
confused by this piece here because
yeah.
that's Anton's house, and that is definitely a single-family home.
It does have a building on it that was used as a cabin previously.
Yeah.
But it's not being used that way now. So I kind of looked at those and I thought, that's a single family home, that's a single family home, that's a single family home. So I couldn't figure out if there was a,
Got it. So we can split hairs
Yeah.
over. Generally, these are
Yeah.
residential homes. People live here.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's what we're saying with homestead. Yep, these are
All I'm
homesteaded
saying is
properties.
that along this alley, there are a number of cabins back in here that, I don't know that, I mean, they're part of a larger property, so are they they're classified as homestead? I mean, just, that's one of those things with the tax classification that's confusing about
Yes,
what it is we're looking
Well,
at.
do any of you?
And some parcels are, there's, part of it is homestead and part of it is not.
That's right, that's what
So
I'm talking
I
about.
don't know how which part you took. I mean, if you look at a tax statement, there can be,
well, the
More than
homestead
one.
should be applied to the parcel, is my understanding, but.
We don't have a lot of these. I mean, do any of you recognize any of these red properties?
Yeah.
And like, tell me one and tell me how it's different than something else.
that's a duplex,
Yep.
that's a single family home. That is a single family home. That is a single family home. That's a single family home.
And that they're
That's a single family
and that they're
home.
different is because historically they used to have a.
Oh, we don't know why.
cabin
Well-
or-
We don't know why. We haven't
Well,
figured out that
yeah,
I
pattern.
think,
Okay.
I think that is part of it, and I did talk to Kyle at the county, but it's, the definition says it was previously a cabin,
Got it. Okay.
and now they're homesteaded. So that's why they're being separated out, I think, is.
Yeah, but it's not just residential 1 unit, it's they're saying residential 1 to 3 units, which is.
Well, I think he said it,
Which is this category here, which,
Yeah, there's 18 of them in the city.
but there's probably the rare ones that do have 2 or 3.
I mean, unless we're really
In the
splitting
past.
hair, we have 712 units. Roughly 500 of them are residential families. single-
Owner occupied,
Yeah.
yeah. That's what we're saying.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, with the numbers.
well, there may be better ways to describe that than calling them homestead properties, because that's not what we're really asking the questions about. But if there are homes on there, are they rental homes, are they?
Well, isn't that divided up in these other sections? Don't we know which ones are these are rentals and
Well, let's look at
It-
that.
Well, so
Yeah.
here's, and we can change the terminology, but here's the non-homestead ones, and then there's seasonal residential, recreational on the next one. So this one is showing, I mean, some of these are not homesteaded. They're rare, but you'll see there's some of these. So it probably goes to your point, that's not probably the ideal term.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get into it to look at that one.
So, yeah, maybe there is a better term if we can come up with it, but.
What we're trying to represent here is residentially used properties
Yes.
that are not homesteaded, that are probably rental properties.
Yeah, that's what these should be.
and I don't know how many there are, but we do have homesteaded properties of people who claim the homestead on their residence here, but still go south and leave that house empty.
And so that's the next map, we think.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, except some still have the classification of homestead.
Yeah,
Because that's non-homestead, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yep,
that's true.
yeah.
Is there a
Yes,
certain number of days that you can be away, like on vacation?
I think there is, that the assessor's office uses, but I don't know the
I don't
exact.
know how you'd ever know.
yeah, well, there's
They have to
something
fill out a
about,
form.
yeah, there's something about short-term rentals is if you do it more than like 30 days or
Yeah,
250
there's a
days.
definition for that.
Yeah.
And there's a definition for homesteading
Yeah.
too. That you have to live there, I think there's over 6 months of the year, and you have to be in residence at a certain time. But
So what this is including right now is, the easiest ones are, there's only 4 apartments, properties. And apartments means there's 4 or more units. So this is not an apartment. This
that's
is,
Gopher cabins.
yeah, yeah. So there's only 4 of those properties. And then there's 4 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, of the lower income rental housing. And that's 93 units, so that's a lot of units,
Okay, so-
but it's only 4
Car
properties.
Review and
Granbury
Apartments and then Birchwood
Birch
and
Grove and
Sawtooth Ridge.
And then it's including non-homesteaded, single-family residents, and then the 1 to 3 again. So this one, 1 to 3, it's a mix of singles, doubles, threes, and there's not that many, so we've talked about, we could convert these properties into units. You know, that's something that's doable because it's not tons of properties that would have to be
And
looked
these are
at.
places that people would be renting.
They're not homesteaded, so,
Was your place up here?
The place I rent is highlighted as a rental.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
saw
don't,
it.
I didn't.
is that you right there?
Oh, there.
Yeah, yep,
Okay,
that's me.
so this is, what it's saying to me is there's not a whole heck of a lot of these.
you know, we'll go over the numbers, but
I don't even know how to make that claim. Is there enough or too many or
Well, I don't
too
know
little?
whether there's enough or too many.
I mean, obviously, we don't have enough housing, but I'm just
I
like,
was kind of surprised. I expected more.
more rentals. Okay.
Or more non-homestead. It's what,
Yeah.
Okay.
good.
See what else.
Well, I'm glad we split them out because it's definitely easier to see. And then this is seasonal, residential, recreational, so like you said, non-homesteaded, so cabins, basically. I mean, this is, I think they created this like in 2001 or something, they said. So you
And
can
are
see
these
where
are
those
places
are.
that people come back and stay at? I mean, again, are these properties that people own that are
They're
second homes.
second homes?
Yep, they're
or
not,
vacant lots there. Isn't that the joins land there?
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's only recently vacant,
Yeah,
and this data
so-
may not have caught up to
You
that.
have Todd Miller's development and Gordon Rink. Well,
Some of the
I don't know what that
resorts
is.
are
Oh, is that
seasonal
what
rec
that's-
residential.
That's, no, Gordon
Yeah.
Rehnquist is, oh yeah.
His is commercial, I think, which is weird, because I would have expected to see his too. But he's not on. Oh no, he's here. Homesteaded. So that's, actually, I'm gonna write that note. So that's something you might have mentioned, Stacy. It's the idea that some of these homesteaded properties have portions that are not homesteaded too. So we have to figure out if we can see that in the data.
yeah.
The other note I've got here is some homesteads are used seasonally. And I don't know how we're gonna be able to find that.
Yeah, I don't know how you figure that out.
So, but we'll put some thought into it.
And why does that matter? Is it about taxes, or why does it matter that you?
So why does it matter to us
Yeah.
for this purpose?
Yeah.
Well, one of the questions is, how many homes do we have that are empty a bunch of the time? So they could be used for residential purposes for people who are actually attempting to live here. And are there zoning rules or programs or incentives or other things we can do to shift the number away from empty all winter to useful to our people
Got
that
it. So
are
you
trying
want to
live
go
here?
to these owners and say, hey, we recognize that you're here half the year.
I don't know if we want to, but I think that's an option we want to at least be able to explore.
Okay.
And if we don't understand, I mean, if there's only 6 of them and we think there's 40, but there's only 6, then it's not worth spending our time on. if there's 100 of them out of our 700 homes, we should probably spend some time on it.
So if there's some level of housing shortage, it's not that you need to build it necessarily.
Gotcha.
Maybe there's housing that's not being used a lot of the time, and
So I think there's two types of that. One is a homestead property where people go away for a lengthy period of time and are back here for a period of time, but it is their primary residence, and that's where they have their homestead. And
So here's what I
I see those in here, because I don't see them on here. They're not a seasonal, what do you call them?
Seasonal residential recreation.
Seasonal residential recreation property, where those people might have a seasonal property here that they come, and it's maybe their second home that they don't do vacation rental out of, but they just come here
Right.
for,
Yeah.
you know, it might come year round, but they only come for short periods of time.
And their other home is in a state where they don't pay property taxes, so they want to have this one homesteaded.
right.
Or
Whether they
or
meet
if
the
they
requirements or
don't
not.
homestead it, and it's a seasonal, it comes under the seasonal classification, they may live in the Twin Cities and drive
Yeah.
up here and use that property. And there seem to be more of those than there are of these non-homesteaded.
These are supposed to be, these are probably rental properties. They're being used residentially, but they're not homesteaded because
Yeah.
they're rentals.
And they're not claiming them as cabins.
Some of those are resorts. Some of those are second homes.
Yep.
And what's the number on this? Is that number over there?
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
are on?
Non-homestead is 47.
47. No, just.
Well,
Oh, wait, I'm not counting.
yeah, we have it up on the
Yeah.
screen, actually.
We'll see
Okay,
it.
all right.
I can go.
I'll wait, oh wait.
Yeah.
It seems
Yeah.
small.
That's what I thought.
Well, we can just look quick, it's easy. Non-homestead is 68 total.
Still.
No, that's not units, that's properties.
Properties.
So there's a lot more than when you count the apartment units.
Well, yeah, actually, it's what it would be 60, because the top ones are apartments, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
So you're really interested in that 4713, right?
60.
So 60.
60 houses being rented, 8 apartment buildings.
What do you do with houses like, you know, as someone who rents a house, you know, you see people like, yeah, I live upstairs, you can rent downstairs. What's that classified as?
I suspect that is part of this. Some homestead properties also have commercial or non-homesteaded uses in them, and I don't know if we can gather that. And so why would we want to know that? It gets again at the number of units, and if that's a big time use, are we acknowledging it in our zoning? Are we allowing it? But even if we don't have any data about it, we can still talk about it as a housing issue.
And we do think there's a fair number of these that might be vacant, right? So the owners aren't living in them, they could be rented out, or they might just be vacant, right?
Some of them, yeah. Although this one that's a weird non-homestead qualifying. We don't know what that means, right? That's jargony.
Well, it just means non-homestead.
That's Mike's place,
Yeah.
and it's the house above me, which is empty most of the time.
Which is also, oh yeah, no, it's a rental. Yeah.
But it's also the Arrowhead building,
Oh,
right?
Huh?
So they've got an apartment, even though it's a commercial building. It's mostly commercial building, but they've got an apartment.
Oh,
It's the.
so that would be one of those mixed use, because I know that,
Yeah.
yeah, it's commercial on the bottom, and then it's short-term rental on the top.
Yeah, this is kind of a mixed bag.
what's this wacky long stretch?
I think that's maybe vacant. Who's next to? So this is WTIP. This is the professional building. There's nothing next to them, is there?
There's a vacant lot.
I think it's vacant.
On the streets, so.
Yeah.
So
It's all the way to the back.
it should be vacant.
I think it's vacant. I don't think there's any property on it. If there is, it might be all the way down at the bottom.
Might be down in the lake, yeah. might come all the way down
Yeah,
to the
yeah,
water,
right.
and then it might be on,
Yeah,
this
we
might
can
be
check
the-
it.
I mean, I know there's a house on this property that's, but, yeah, I don't know.
So we talked about this one. Then the last one, kind of the inventory, is short-term rentals. And so the way the county captures this data is they do it not in the parcel data, so it's its own set of data, and so it's just dots on the properties, and they call them cabins versus resorts. In Grand Marais, these are considered resort. Both of these are condos.
Yeah.
So that's
why
where
why
they,
the distinction, a cabin for this condo and a,
Not important to us.
seemed like it must be important to the assessor's office when they gather that information.
Yeah.
I think I was wondering if it was because this is shared entries and this is all separate entries, right?
That
So-
could be.
Okay.
And this doesn't have any common space really, right?
There is a pool.
Oh, there is a
I don't know
pool.
if they use that anymore, do they?
Well, I don't know.
I think they took that thing out. But those two developments have multiple dots because they're condoed, so there's multiple owners. So we know the units there.
Got it.
All the rest of them, we have no idea how many units are in them.
So you can see the total is, again, properties is 65, but some of these have more than
And are
one
we overlapping
unit.
here? Are some of these being rented as apartments? I mean,
Yeah.
are we so we have double classifications or?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, we know just anecdotally that some of these are occasionally rented as apartments, but generally they're not.
Or vacation rentals?
That's what they are. We're
Yeah,
representing. They're all vacation.
short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Lonnie's stuff
Yep.
and Tim McDonald.
And they're showing up, and we'll go over this, but they're showing up on a number of different housing types. So some are on the SRR, some are on this. There's a mix of them. So, and that might change over time because the county's looking at this whole issue. So, I mean, it sounds like that could go to commercial even, is what the
Yeah,
county's.
That's what the state wants to know.
And they're talking about that. So this map is just showing your current zoning map with the dots over the zoning. And basically it's showing that since they're allowed as lodging, they're allowed in non-residential districts. And that's pretty much where they are. So you don't see them in here or there or up there. So it seems to be working.
So we've got a few.
I don't think they're operating anymore.
I don't know what this is.
Looking
But
for this.
we should probably
That's
not delve too deeply into
that's-
that conversation.
not relevant.
And then the
part of this,
next thing that we mapped was residential property value, so that's total building and land. You can do them separately, but we felt like it's probably best to look at the total. And these ranges are kind of relate to what the county's housing study used in the 2015 study that they did, in that kind of the average sales price at that time in Grand Marais was in this area, maybe around 200, 180, something like that.
What year was that?
2015 was the study when they were looking at housing sales. So they were looking 15, 14, maybe back to 2012 even, but not this many properties. They were looking just at what was selling. So I think this is kind of new data that we're looking at, or you're looking at. Excuse me. So we'll talk about what patterns maybe there are. I mean, we don't see a lot of patterns of all the expensive is over here, all the lower priced homes are over here. And then we mapped also tax exempt properties. Yeah, I mean, these are big.
That's
Yeah,
all,
it's
that's all,
because, yeah.
it's all federal land, yeah.
City,
Or
state,
No, that's-
federal,
that's
school,
city,
county.
I guess this is state and federal up here.
Yeah.
federal out here.
But that relates to, property values for the
And I
city.
assume you're gonna show us numbers on.
Yep, we have numbers for, yep, we have slides for each of these. And then this one is getting at, if you were gonna identify where there's opportunities, shorter term or longer term, for developing new housing, kind of the two key things are what's vacant. So we're showing what's vacant by zoning district. So you can see the two residential ones, a lot of the yellow, but I mean, the city, that's way out here.
If this is in the city limits,
Yeah,
why can't you change its class?
you can.
You can.
You can.
So you can say, let's develop that into permanent residences if you wanted.
You could do that.
But the current zoning map, residences are allowed here, and then also, downtown, 61, mixed use, and I think the RCN. And so you can see up here, this is how many acres we're showing for each of those for the vacant parcels. So, a lot of this, now this, as you know, a lot of this up here wouldn't be buildable probably anyway. But a lot of acres on the map today, I'm sorry, maybe this isn't buildable, but, a lot of acres out here, only 4 acres in this one area for what is today called multifamily residential. And then the other ones, it's just 1.5, this adds up to 3.5. These other ones,
What's
this,
multifamily residential, what does that mean? Areas where you can build like an apartment or something?
Well-
That's what the name would imply, but.
More flexibility for that, but
yeah, we'll talk about, that's what the intent is, but when you actually look at the regulations, they're the same between these two.
They're the what?
They're the same.
Oh.
So it's not really,
I'm just sort of
Targeting
say
it?
like there's like such a small amount of that versus.
Yeah.
yeah. Because this district today in your zoning map, you can see it up here, it's only here. It's not anywhere else. And this is the only vacant land that's in that area. So we have some points, we want to talk about that and see if there's some issues there.
the only comment I had about this map was the sewer and water.
Yeah, it's not accurate. The electric's great,
Oh,
though.
yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Electric is.
Sewer and water doesn't run between 2nd Street and 5th Street.
I wondered,
No, across those lots, no, it doesn't exist.
Where are you
Which
talking
one?
about?
Sorry.
who was talking
You
about
got him that time.
You owed them.
This stuff,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's not there.
everything above 2nd Street.
I stand all day, man, I want to see it.
Well, it makes it
You can.
easier to.
And I don't know if there's other ones, but that was pretty obvious.
Yeah, the Creechville stuff. There's not these lines either. But that's okay. The concept here is sound, that we have some work to do. The county has a map of our system that I don't know where they got it from, and the water and sewer is very accurate, but we can change that.
Yeah, the only point to be made is that when there's no sewer and water, in order to develop these areas that are zoned for residential.
Or roads,
there'd be-
yeah.
Yeah, there's no sewer and water or roads, so
Yeah.
significant investment.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not just a matter of,
And oftentimes, the sewer is the biggest expense when it's coming to developing these, but there's wetlands in a lot of that spot that's not developed yet too. And it's not captured. There's really no way for us to capture that on a map, but we know it's an issue.
Yeah, so we have some thoughts about
yeah.
that issue
And
too.
this obviously that's the new one-worth housing development where
It's platted already?
it's already
Yeah.
platted,
Yeah.
there's eight homes in that
Oh.
development already. So, I mean, it's just,
So this is just, yeah, it's just not caught up.
it's
a couple
brand,
years
it's
old.
brand new data, so, I mean, it's,
Yeah.
the homes we just put in there this last fall.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that whole.
All right, there's our maps.
So we can come back to these. We can mark these up as much as you want. But we have some findings that we wanted to go over to get things started on identifying issues, and then we can talk about your thoughts about those, and then just how we move forward on looking for solutions for some of those. So, let's see, what did I... Is that what we're doing? Yeah. So, background information and data. So we've looked at the comprehensive plan, which for our purposes, we're really thankful that it's short, because in other cities, we have to look at something this thick when we have to look at a comp plan. We've looked at the zoning ordinance. We have the county's property data, and we've been working closely with them on trying to answer some of those questions about tax class codes. We've looked at the county housing study and the survey they did in 2015. We have some census data that's, we'll show you, but there's some questions about that data. But the study that the county did used U.S. Census data from 2010. So, we want to try to get the best numbers we can get to. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We looked at the study for that the EDA did for assisted living in 2016, and then we've looked a little bit at the art space study, and I think there was like three or 5 sites that they were kind of targeting as the preferred sites if they were going to do something in Grand Marais. So preliminary findings. So, like Mike said, we want to stay at the high level as much as we can before we dive into anything. But really, generally, what it's showing right now is that there's about 500 owner-occupied housing properties. It seems like, or 70% of your properties, residential properties. Year-round rental, about 68 properties. So there's more units than that, but properties. And then seasonal housing properties, it looks like there's about 147. So total properties would be 712. And again, that's not commercial or civic or any of that. That's just housing properties. Units is probably more, and we have some unit information that we have to verify, but it's probably more like in the 800 to 850 range for housing units in the city.
Does that seem pretty consistent with our utility billing information?
So I'm going to throw this out, but we need to work on these. So what the census data says is that there's about 650 occupied housing units and then 168 vacant. So it's all about definitions, just like the county's tax codes. The census I know it does. It counts seasonal housing as vacant because it's vacant part of the year. So in the 2010 census data, which they used in the housing study, there's like 115 of those units were seasonal, and then the rest were vacant structures, they said.
Does that have anything to do at all with the timing of when the census information is gathered? Because we have people that are gone seasonally during the winter months.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not.
I've always wondered that, how they get tabulated, whether they actually get counted as a resident or whether they're viewed as a seasonal type thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that right now, but so that's where we get to that, 800 or so units in the city. But even and this is in the housing study, but you can see it's interesting to see owner occupied versus, renter or non-owner occupied, let's say. That's a higher percentage than, other cities see for sure. So, Grand Marais is unique in the county for that too.
And that almost half of our houses are rentals.
Well, this is not
Units.
saying that.
What's that renter occupied then?
That includes each apartment unit
Yeah,
is a
that
renter
includes
occupied
apartments.
housing unit.
Okay.
So it's not half of our single-family homes are being
I got it. I got it. When you add up all of the apartments together, we have like roughly 800 places that people live that they
Yeah.
pay PUC.
Yeah.
And
So this is
about-
maybe more saying something like there's 514 houses in town, and 337 of them are owner occupied, and 150 of them are rented, and 150 of them or 100 of them are vacant, or something like that. We can't really put the data sets together and figure it out for sure. We know they're just classifying things a little differently.
Well, and, I mean, we've started to compare numbers. It might be misrepresenting non-owner occupied because you do have so many cabins and second homes. I mean, I think that's a possibility. But that's going to demand comparing numbers between, this data and what the census data has. And, the data census data is not very detailed. So you have to
But
kind
when
of
you
read
talk,
between the
this is
lines.
all census data.
This is all
information.
census data.
So it's different than the tax classification data, which I might give this more credibility than the tax classification, just because the variety of tax classifications of property can be in multiple, have
Yeah.
multiple tax classifications.
Right. That's true. So another way that the census breaks it out is by unit type. So, that's interesting because that shows 514 detached homes and, how many mobile homes and how many 20-plus units. So, it's another way to try to see what are the best numbers that the city should use and creating an inventory of what you have. So we need to do the comparison between these numbers and see if we can get at the best numbers to use going forward, but it's what we have. So then types of owner-occupied housing properties, we talked about this, I think, but basically 480 are single units, but we actually think those 18 are almost all single units also. So I think in the end, we're probably just going to simplify this and say it's 497, and let's not get caught up in the
Can you
details.
go back one slide?
So it's close to that 514, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at it says between 20-plus unit properties and 5 to 19 unit properties, there's 200 and some
Mhm.
units available there. Do you know what gets counted in that? Is that like, could the nursing home, because those are residents, they're residents of the nursing home, would they be cast into something like that? Or
Is that one of those 4 apartment? No, that's
No,
separate.
it's
But
a
then it
hospital
probably
itself.
is. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that would probably be, oftentimes that's considered group living or congregate living, and
Yeah, and
it could be in there.
I just don't see a housing type of something that would
Yeah.
reflect that.
No.
How does that, I'm just curious, how does that figure in our goals as far as like creating affordable housing and creating, those are, that's kind
Well, I
of
think
specialty
all
housing.
it
isn't it?
does is give us some baseline information, because if we think that we have 200 apartment,
Got it, and some of those are
units.
nursing home ones.
it's, we don't
I
have any
gotcha.
control over
I
those.
gotcha.
And, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, that number surprised me, that there's 200 units. I'm thinking that.
Yeah, I was trying to add up.
Even with those 4 properties, I don't get anywhere near 200,
No.
or near the 155 even. That seems to be,
Yeah, it does seem high.
seems high.
But that's, so we're just showing it because that's what's in the county's housing study.
Well, the
That came from
20-plus
the
units
census.
doesn't say they're rentals. So that also includes homestead and probably Grand Marais condos.
Oh, condos.
And that's 60 units right there, isn't it? 50 units between the two of them?
Now that'd make up the extra 50 that I'm missing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and because we're using all property data, that just shows up as 1 or 2 properties, right?
No, they're both condoed.
Oh, they're condoed.
Yeah, so it shows up. I'll show this to you later.
Yeah, yeah, okay. All right, so, and then, so we had this one up. Types of year-round rental housing are non-owner occupied. So, you know, it looks like there's only 4 properties for apartments, both types. But we know the subsidized ones equal 93 units, but we could probably pretty easily get at the other one just by, you know, we know the 4 properties that are
Yeah.
market rate, so. And apartments in quotes, because one of them for sure is not an apartment.
Well, it's a 4-unit,
It's 4 plus
maybe
units.
5 units.
Yeah.
Generally being used as vacation rental, and occasionally apartment.
Oh, so might not even be in the right classification.
I forget which one it's in.
Yeah. Okay. And then seasonal residential recreational, so there's about, well, it says there's 147 of them, properties. They're vacation cabins or second homes generally. They're non-homesteaded, mostly single housing units distributed throughout the city. So we're, you know, basically these are the findings of looking at the map and the numbers. There's a wide range of property sizes. And then it sounds like the change to commercial is being considered due to the growth in short-term rentals of vacation cabins. So that, you know, this one's getting intertwined with short-term rental also, which is not handled in the tax class code today.
Yeah.
So that's what that's what the articles have been about and the discussion's been about. So this could change. And then these are the numbers on short-term rental properties. Excuse me. So the way we're discussing is the cabins, the Cobblestone Cove villas are attached cabins, whereas the others are probably not attached. Some could be attached, I guess, but it's a wide mix of things.
It is, and you know, the East Bank, Cobblestone Cove, most people probably don't think about short-term rental when they think about those 2 properties. Those will just look and act like hotels.
Right.
They're downtown, they were designed as hotels. Those 23 other properties, there are more than 23 units there. Some of those are multiple unit structures, and we don't necessarily know. But we wanted to capture this, and particularly to map it, just because one of the mythologies about housing here is the interaction between the demand for short-term rentals and residential uses. So we just need to understand it. Like, okay, well, where are they, and how many of them are there, and where could they be? And
Do we want to know, though, how many units there are on that parcel for density reasons? Would there be any reason why in this block, we have 5 short-term rentals, and each of them have 5 units? I mean, I'm just throwing that out as wondering if that's an issue.
If we're looking for baseline information, certainly if might be worthwhile information to have. I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, the area over.
if someone could give it to me, I'd like it, yeah. But if it was something we had to develop, I don't know if it's relevant to the housing side of that conversation. It's definitely relevant to the regulating vacation rental side of the conversation, but the other side, not as much.
So we're looking at that, the cabins detached, and there's 23 properties. We're including places like Todd Miller's,
Yeah.
Gordon Lindquist's.
Yeah, well, Gordon's not on that list. Gordon's is residential homesteaded.
But he has 3 cabins that he rents out.
Yeah, at least, doesn't he? So, and I've already kind of pointed that out, but Todd is, 2 of those 23 is Todd, but we know he's got 7, 8, 9 units on his property. One of them is the 6-unit hotel downtown. One of them is a 4-unit house, so, I mean, we just know that there's multiple units there. It's not, unless you want to talk about, forcing those units to convert to residential or enticing them to convert to residential, then knowing how many of them there really are is not super useful to this conversation.
So were the East Bay and Cobblestone, were they at one point hotels and they were commercial? And then flipped to residential at some point and then became
East
condos?
Bay would have been a hotel. Cobblestone was,
It was always
Built.
condos?
it was built as a condo,
Yeah.
as a resort condo, vacation rental
Yeah.
condo. So they would have changed classifications for the East Bay, but there would have been,
So that's confusing then when we say number of properties. East Bay Suites has 32, Cobblestone Cove has 10, and the
because
cabin's
they're-
detached.
because they're individually owned.
It's because they're condos.
Yeah, they have parcels. There's 32 parcels inside of
Parcels.
that building in East Bay. One building,
Okay.
32 parcels.
So properties equal
But none of
units.
them are homesteaded, none of them, they're all vacation
all-
or
Yeah.
part-time, so
Yep.
I mean, it's like, when it
But
comes to.
people have asked,
Can I,
would we, could I live here?
oh,
So,
And why not then?
yeah, I mean, the regulations allow a path to that.
So the Cobblestone were never permanent residents?
No.
They were built to be rental, vacation rental.
Or just vacation homes, but
Yeah,
yeah.
vacation homes, right.
Your
Yeah.
standard North Shore Resort
Yeah, right.
condo ownership.
Yeah, okay. So our understanding right now is short-term rentals are allowed as a lodging use in the city's zoning ordinance, and the city did a lot of work to clean that up so that that's pretty clear across the districts. And you can see it on that zoning map that they're not in the residential districts, they're in the districts that allow lodging, which includes the downtown, waterfront, 61, the mixed use, and those other three. And then, I think I said this, but short-term rental properties are not a specific classification in the county's tax data. So short-term rental use is not part of what we're showing on, any of these maps. It's just those dots. So it can be, can get out of date quicker, I guess. Maybe not quicker, but it's done separately. So when we talked to the county, they said, it's pretty accurate, but it hasn't been, I mean, Mike, you even said there's some things that aren't on there that should be probably already.
No, but Bob sells himself short. It's really accurate.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think what we don't know is, the amount of vacation rental they actually do. I mean, nobody's been able to quantify that.
The frequency of it.
Yeah.
Right. Some of them might be used very intermittently, others are specifically, used for vacation rental, and the owners may never use, the properties.
Yeah. Property values, it appears that they're pretty mixed in, the different areas or blocks in the community. Higher property values, as you might expect, are more common on the waterfront near downtown, it looks like, and then on large lots. The lowest property values of that lowest band, maybe there's more further away from downtown, but that's a question mark. But if you really analyze the patterns of that map, north and east, maybe there's more.
I think it has more to do probably with the age of the structures.
Yeah,
Some
which
of
is
them
not
own-
data that we could get from the county. That is really helpful data if you have it, but they don't have that. And they don't have condition of structures, or the city doesn't, and so the county doesn't either. And that's not atypical, but that, if you have condition of properties, that's really helpful to look at into map, but,
We don't, and I don't mean to.
yeah, and usually it's an effort, you have to do a
It's only
windshield
700
survey
of
or, what's that?
There's only 700 of them.
Yeah. That's right. Oh.
10 minutes each.
There's a substantial amount of tax exempt land. Well, yeah, I mean, I mean, the ones I've seen, I think often cities will hire interns or something and, just decide this is what we're going to look for, and it's a windshield survey, and it's really useful if you can do it. Substantial amount of tax exempt land, as you know, that's why we mapped it. And then, I don't know, I mean, this is information that we knew you were interested in, but I don't know if we have identified all the patterns, or are there perceptions or trends that you see related to property values or that you think about? I'm just not sure that the map is showing anything really strongly.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that there are some of the areas of the city that were first developed are developed on smaller lots, which, when you look at the lots on Broadway, there's lots as narrow as 25 feet. Go to First Avenue West, and there's quite a few homes built on 40-foot lots. Those are some of the homes that were built, in the city, long ago. I mean, seems that as
And they should show up in the lower value range then, right? Most
generally, because larger homes would need a larger lot to these are smaller homes on smaller lots. It's almost the reverse of, the further you get away from the downtown, the larger the lots seem to get, because the availability of land at the time people were building, they bought larger pieces.
Are there many lots without sewer
Yeah.
in the city?
Not with single-family homes on them.
There's not.
There's a couple dozen maybe.
Yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah,
They're easy to see because they're big.
Yeah, right.
there are platted lots that are privately owned that are beyond city sewer and water or even roads that have been vacant, forever. As Mike was talking about, sometimes it's wetland issues or other issues that dictate the potential for development of that. That's not, I mean, even if we extended sewer and water, the wetland issues, would prevail over that.
So vacant residential land, so what we're seeing is there's a significant quantity of unimproved residential land, as I mentioned over by the maps. It's dominated by the R1 district, so that's 313 acres. Not that all of that's buildable, and it's not on sewer and water today. But there's only 4 acres in the R2 zoning district, and then only 3.5 in the other districts that allow residential. So not a lot of land for non-single family home development. Now,
And even
Well-
that 4.1 acres of multi-family zoning, probably more than half of that doesn't have sewer and water service available to it.
yeah, okay. When looking at vacant residential land, we know the utilities data needs to be updated. Some vacant land lacks access to road and utilities, we talked about that. Potential development challenges related to slopes and wetlands, especially as you go north, I guess, right? One idea we had was maybe consider identifying infill land versus expansion land on that vacant land map that we had over there. I know in the comp plan, one of the policies, I think it is, or goals, is that infill should be prioritized over expanding for new housing. So right now, we have the big number of 313 acres, say, but if we, look at, get the utilities data updated, and then looked at how many acres, like you said, is ready to go, and what isn't ready to go, what isn't infill necessarily, that might be really helpful, because maybe there's just not enough land guided for new development. And we've done that in other cities. We recently did it in Red Wing. I don't know how well you know Red Wing, but they're pretty long along the river, and they have a lot of their new development is just continuing to go out, away from their downtown. And so in their current comp plan, we identified infill versus expansion and one other category. Now it's escaping me, but they really wanted to focus on not expanding the city, really figuring out, redevelopment. So they identified redevelopment land, and so we had acreages identified for redevelopment versus infill versus expansion.
Will you explain to me again what infill is?
So it'd be the land, go to the, let's see. Why can't I see this? That's how. So, on this, so infill would be land that's vacant but surrounded by development or has access to sewer and water. So some of these pieces, like, whoops. So some of that yellow where the sewer and water is, and has streets to it, that would be infill. But the stuff to the north, up by the green, that doesn't have a road to it, doesn't have sewer and water to it.
And a good example of that out on 8th Avenue West, when you're going up the hill.
Yep.
There's a site that's been cleared off. That was a vacant lot.
Yep.
That's going to be new home site. That's infill. It's access to sewer and water. All you have to do is go in there and develop the lot. That lot needed a variance in order to do that, because I think it was only 65 feet wide, but had access and
So how many acres of property do we have like this?
Infill?
Yeah.
Sure.
parcels, and
Not a lot.
not a lot.
Not a
But
lot.
that's the question is, was it worth maybe just differentiating so we can answer that?
Because we can say there's, a lot of land available for residential, but if it doesn't have access,
Right. I think that's a real reality.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
forget it.
the market's been pretty clear about that too. It
Yeah.
just doesn't pay when there's multiple issues to go in there and develop. And even when it does pay, it has to be done at such a scale that it's hard to find somebody who's been interested in doing it. So,
So we're starting to see those vacant lots become more attractive for people to buy.
yeah.
The value has gone up significantly on those vacant lots.
The very few that are available is what you're really
That's
saying.
right.
So, yeah, so one of our big problems is we just don't really have any very much available land to do any development. All right.
And that's like
Yeah.
the Joins property on 5th Street and 4th Avenue West, where Howard Joins' old house was. And somebody bought that last year. The developer wanted to split that into create 5 parcels out of it. It's already
Oh.
subdivided. He could do that, but he needed permission to make one of the lots less than the
Got it. I think I know what you're talking about.
minimum lot width or area. Might have been both.
because the minimum is 75, is that right?
75
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
120, 10,000 square.
But that's not necessarily, that's not what we're talking about, like affordable housing either. Those are expensive lots.
We're not
No,
saying
it
it's
would-
affordable housing,
Yeah.
all we're saying is that it would open up properties for home development. And whether it's somebody locally that buys that lot and develops it, or somebody out of town that buys that lot and develops it and turns it into a vacation home, or a vacation, seasonal property.
Right.
We don't have any control of that. In fact, I would say most of those infill lots are what I would call not affordable,
Right.
not being used.
But I mean,
built as affordable
isn't
homes.
one of the guiding principles of us, or our work here, to try to find affordable housing and to create some of that?
It's
If
one,
you,
it's
if you
one
want
of
it to
them.
be, and I think it's generally something we think about, but sometimes a strategy to do that is to add more of every kind of housing.
Okay.
Because the ones that should be affordable aren't, because there's so much demand for housing that the prices just
So this,
get
this
raised
area
up.
in here where there's, yellow vacant land, it looks like, is that to be built on? Does that usually have to get subdivided or
I would
get
think every
variances,
one of
or-
those pieces that's yellow there is lacking access to sewer. There might be 2 or 3 small pieces that have sewer access. So that's why most of that is,
So that's the
Vacant.
big barrier.
yeah.
And then is most of this land not platted either, right?
No, it's platted out, where all those roads and sewer lines are shown. It's all platted out.
But two lot sizes?
Platted out in 1920s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could be 40-foot lots, it could be 25-foot lots.
Yeah, so in that case, even if they did have sewer, or they'd have to get variances or not?
Well, they-
You have to buy multiple lots.
They just have to own more than
You
one.
have to, okay. Yeah, so one of the things we want to talk about is, go back to this. I think we want to go to the next one. So R1 and R2 districts today are almost the same in what's permitted and conditional, even though they, the purposes are different. You know this probably, but single family, 2 families permitted, and conditional is required for anything else, even though R2 is supposed to be for multifamily. Housing with, or that's what the second point is. So another thought is to clarify where housing with 3+ units should be allowed in the city, where you would want, where the city would want it to be. Today it's all located in one area in that one district, on the east side. There's only 4 acres of that land, and you're saying maybe half of that is not accessible, or it doesn't have access to sewer and water, so it's even less than that. There's only 3.5 acres of vacant land for the other districts that allow residential. But that land wouldn't be required to have residential. It could be all non-residential, so it's not, it doesn't have a preference for residential necessarily. And then maybe evaluating if vacant properties are large enough for multifamily housing, the ones that are available. Would they fit a senior housing building on there or not? Another thing to think about is to consider identifying the desired housing types as uses. The best example is senior housing. So in a lot of cities, senior housing isn't identified in the zoning code. So when developers come in and want to do that type of development, they have to go through extra steps because it's not, it's not the same as an apartment building or townhouses. It has other things involved with it, and so it's harder to get it through the development process. So a lot of cities are adding senior housing as a use, like multifamily or townhouse, and then deciding where it's appropriate. So sometimes cities think they'd rather have that than a regular apartment building, in more places than a regular apartment building. But oftentimes they're bigger than, an apartment building might be.
Yeah, and we haven't specifically at the planning commission level talked about senior housing, but has been discussed at the Economic Development Authority, and we're working with a prospective developer, and that's when they did the study, and analyzed a few different sites, and for a number of reasons, the prospective developer, said not right now.
Yeah.
But there were a number of sites that were identified, and I don't think that they necessarily met our our zoning requirements, they would have taken some action on part of the city to, either give a variance or make a zone change or do something that would have allowed that type of thing to happen.
Yeah, so.
It's kind of an awkward position to be in if you're trying to do a project and you don't really have a place in the
Yeah.
city that you can do it, but you're trying to invest some energy into seeing if it's possible.
Yeah, so I mean, in general, the goal often is to make development easier, or not to make it easy for them to do whatever they want, but to lay out in the zoning what the city wants, rather than making them jump through hoops.
The steps that are necessary to get an approval.
Yeah.
I mean, if there's no process to that, then, or just kind of lack of direction, makes it hard for a developer.
Where something is appropriate to the developer, they run the risk of going through a process where they might get rejected and spend all that money on, going through an entitlement process and doing concepts, and then ultimately it doesn't, like you said, it didn't work. And if there wasn't a place that was actually zoned clearly for it, that could have been part of the issue. The market's
A
part
good
of it
example
too.
is the one roof housing project, on Second Street, that they built 8 single-family homes, which are allowed in that zone district, but they have an additional portion of that land that they've reserved or haven't decided on what they're going to do for development. And part of the consideration is that might be an area where they would want to put some quad housing. There's a few more hoops to jump through to get an approval on that, whereas the residential side, there's still hoops to jump through, but maybe more of a defined process.
Yeah.
If we wanted to see those type of multifamily type uses, what could we do to help that process?
Yeah, and I don't know enough about.
That's a question that goes on the list, right?
Yeah.
So, and hopefully there's more ideas for the list. If not, there'll be other chances to populate it.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to try to answer any of those tonight.
Yeah.
I understand
Yeah.
that, but that is a question. I mean,
Yep.
if truly we're trying to provide a means for more housing to be developed, we need to be able to identify to developers what the process is and make it clear that, when they start the process, if they jump through all the hoops, that they get the permit at the end, rather than, well, I jumped through this hoop, then there's another hoop, and there's another hoop, and you just don't know. These projects are expensive. We saw with One Roof Housing how costly that was, and without the buy-downs from the state and from the city and others that contributed to that project, it wouldn't be affordable housing. It
Yeah.
would be market rate housing that, families couldn't afford to buy, and that's.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to try to answer the question, but I was just going to say that I don't know what the experience has been with people proposing things and then they don't happen, and why they don't happen. And maybe, because another issue could be that you're just not attracting developers, more generally, because it's the market. They don't think the market's here for some reason, or so. Another example from Red Wing is, they are having a hard time sometimes getting housing developers because I think partially they're too close to the Twin Cities, and single-family houses cost a certain amount to build, and they can get a price that's much different, say in a suburb of the Twin Cities, than what the market can bear in Red Wing. And so there's that gap of the house costs this much, but the average price of houses in Red Wing is right there or below that. And so, they're just not getting developer interest like they'd like to have.
And we had the same thing happen here, is that local developers would much rather build a custom home where
Right.
they're gonna make lots of money on, rather than building a spec house that, the margins are a lot thinner on, and,
Yeah.
so.
So,
And so then getting an outside developer that wants to come up here and do that is expensive, challenging if you can even find one.
yeah, so some of the things we can talk about, the last thing on this slide is, just to finish it off, is maybe consider organizing zoning uses in your code into a table so that it's really clear to developers what's allowed where, and that the language is all the same. So, multifamily shows up in different districts as 3+ units, or it's 2 to 4 or 5 to 10 in this district. And, that's something that might make it easier for people to understand what is allowed and what's a conditional use. And but other things might be, to go to the affordable thing is, I would say 10,000 square feet and 75-foot width is probably bigger than what developers want, right? They're coming in with probably 60
If
or...
you're looking for affordable housing, if you have to buy that size lot, I mean, if you can get by with a 50-foot lot or a 60-foot lot,
Yeah, it's going to be cheaper.
it's gonna be cheaper.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna build a 3,000 square foot house, you're probably not gonna do that on a 50-foot lot. But if you're gonna build a 1,200 or 1,300 square foot house, well, yeah, maybe that's all you need for land. You don't need, this spacious lawn and
Yeah,
side yard separations and that. I mean, we see what homes can be built in town on 40-foot lots that,
right.
have existed for, a long time that, could be done again.
Yeah, so there's different ways that could be addressed. I mean, you could lower the numbers, or you could create a new zoning district that's, smaller single-family lots, and you still have maybe the one that you have today is appropriate in parts of the city, but there are areas where you think smaller lots would be desirable.
Well, and I think one of the things that I've heard is that people like the mix of small homes, large homes on streets, not that every home is a large home on that street or every home is a small home on that street. I think that we should see a mix of sizes and styles, and that saying one end of town or one part of town is going to have big lots, and probably more commensurately is then larger homes, which means more expensive properties, and the other area is going to have small homes. I mean, we're a pretty homogeneous community, and I think doing that kind of segregation is not a good thing.
But do you know, do a lot of lots actually meet the 10,000 or the 75-foot?
I bet the county knows.
You think so?
Yeah.
Ones that have been west of 8th Avenue West on the new sewer and water.
Yeah, that 10,000 foot rule is from 1971, so housing developed before that generally doesn't meet it.
Yeah, because sometimes you find that a city has zoning requirements that haven't been used very much. I mean, they're there, but
Well, they get used, but
well, I mean, the development hasn't.
I think that'd be a
Met-
great number for us to see. My gut feeling is it's probably 50-50, but
But-
a valuation map, or where we see that's great. But what if we also saw a density style map where it says this is how many square feet are in a lot, or how wide the lot is? Because I think there's a lot of fear about the idea of density that's unwarranted, because we're already a lot denser than those rules would imply.
Well, and
So if we
like you
changed
said,
them,
people like the diversity of the lot sizes and house sizes, and if the rule is they all have to be bigger than this, but people actually like a lot of what's less than that, maybe the rules, there should be more than one rule,
yeah,
or more than
I
one
think-
district.
I think over in my side of town, where some blocks only have 7 or 8 houses on the whole block, whereas in other parts of town, there's maybe 15 to 20 houses on a block. You know, I mean, there's not a reason why you couldn't have a smaller lot and a smaller home in those same areas where you have larger lots and larger homes. And it's only because people were required to buy those larger lots when that sewer and water went in there. Couldn't build on a less than 75-foot lot, so.
Yeah.
So maybe we go back to making it a choice. If this lot, if you build up to this square footage house, this is how much land you need. And if you want this house, you can have that house there, but then you need 2 lots or whatever.
That's, you know, the next issue gets right at that too, which is the lot coverage requirement. That's kind of saying how many square feet
Yeah.
can you build on a lot that's.
I
that's a certain
don't want to
size.
mow any more lawn. Why do I have to have a big?
Well, I'm with you. My lot is 60 by 90. That's how big my lot is, and it's plenty big. I'd be happy to get rid of more lawn.
Yeah, I need a couple goats.
So, but what you're doing is you're just offering generally, like, how are we going to create housing? We're going to maybe consider changing some city zone regulations, right?
So
Yeah.
these could be issues that are preventing getting more housing types that you'd like to see in the city. Because, I mean, 10,000 square feet is a big lot in a lot of communities.
Yeah.
I mean, that's used, if people have, if communities have different sizes of residential lots, that would be on the big side.
Well, we don't really have a lot of land ever I mean, we obviously don't have a lot of acreage that we can develop anyway. I mean, so I got it,
Yeah.
I think
It's
people
another direction.
appreciate the variety. I think people want a little creativity, I think people would like, like, I live here, but I can build a garage with an apartment and I can rent that out. I mean, there's, I think people are looking for creative ways of living on their property like that. Okay.
Yeah, so as Mike said, the lot coverage could prevent people from building what they'd want to build, because that's a pretty low, it's a fairly low percentage if you think about smaller lots especially. I mean, it works for the 10,000 probably, because what is that, 2,500 to 3,000 square feet, so that works. But those are big
I even
houses.
think of like a
house.
50-foot wide lot, and generally lots are platted to be 120 or 126 or some number in that range. That's still, 6,000 square feet of, if you used a 25%, or even 25%, that still lets you have a 1,500 square foot footprint
Yeah.
on that lot. I mean, that's, to me, that seems like that would be pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
Even the 30%, does that bump it up to,
Yeah, I'm not-
14 or 1,500?
I don't know if we can do it, but I know the county has building footprints too, so I mean, in theory, the data's out there for house square footage, I guess.
I mean, they've drawn lines. Do they have?
Yeah, I don't know, but
Maybe they do.
they said they have building footprints, so I didn't know if the data's in there for square footages on houses.
We can look at
or
that.
not.
So this is all talking about density. And we've got to figure out in what form we're willing to accept it.
And then the last one is maximum building height. That could be a limitation. That might not be a limitation in Grand Marais specifically, but, in other cities, if you're getting multifamily buildings, often they're going to be 3 or 4 or 5 stories. But I don't know if that's a scale that you would get here. And
Well, it's
it
all
might be
about
a-
the view shed.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
yeah.
So that might-
I just think that's probably one where we don't tread into too far, because
Right.
Nobody wants to look at their neighbor's house, they want to see the lake.
Right, right,
Or at least some glimpse of what might be downhill.
yeah. Parking
As long as
space,
that camper's out of the way.
That is right.
Or you just bring in Phil.
No, I'm just kidding from our last meeting.
10 feet of fill in a 30-foot building?
Yeah, no problem.
as far as parking, the requirement for 1 for single family and 2 family, and then 1.5 for apartments. Typically, we see probably the opposite of that, where, not that it's right, but single family might require 2, but apartments might require less, because if they're if they're more often single person households, one parking space per unit's probably enough. And developers care about that. I mean, they don't want to overbuild parking or have more land that has to be devoted to parking than that they can't use for development. So that might be something to consider, that maybe that would be more attractive for developers if that parking number went down for apartments. And then we looked at planned unit development standards a little bit. Now it sounds like it hasn't been used very much,
Ever.
or ever.
3 acres,
Right,
is probably the stumbling block. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, it could be. The
That'd
densities.
be a whole city block.
Right. Yeah, so, and whether that would be helpful in attracting,
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think there's other ways for us to get at that type of development, just in our standard zoning rules.
yeah, I would think so too, but it's surprising how many cities use the PUD all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Like
that's-
almost for everything.
I
Yeah.
think that's a
So
good
explain
question.
that to me.
Yeah, what does that
do you
mean?
What do you mean by that?
No.
Well, the PUD, without giving you a history of it, but the PUD, historically was meant to be more about cluster development, especially residential
Yeah,
cluster
okay.
development,
That's-
I would say. But in some communities and some level of communities really like it because it offers flexibility, and it's a way to bypass a lot of standards and also get things that cities want that aren't necessarily in the standards. So it becomes a very
Give me some examples, I don't know.
well, so a lot of times in PUDs, you can vary from setbacks, coverage, all those dimensional standards, and you can negotiate those with the city, and instead maybe you get more open space or architectural things that the city wants. It just becomes a negotiating tool. And we know some cities where almost every development that comes in goes through a PUD process. So it's,
We don't have any land for that, right?
Well, this is pretty well designed for not being used the way we've got it. You have a 3-acre piece to start. That's pretty much an entire city block. And then you get 4 units an acre, which is the exact same as our 10,000 square foot. It's actually worse than our 10,000 square foot
Yeah.
lot requirement. So then what do you really get for it? It's hard to
Yeah.
say. So planned unit development, if you imagine, take a 10-acre piece of property and so for 10 acres, I can put 40 units on there. And I put them all in one little 1-acre spot on little tiny lots. And the rest of it is wide open. So it's a way to buy the density off of the rest of that property, use it in one spot, so you don't have to pay for all the infrastructure to develop the whole thing. The developer can still have all the number of units. That's the idea of it. That's not how that's designed, and it's not how it's often used in other cities.
Well, and
So,
the likelihood is if it would be used in the city, it would be used in some of those far-reaching areas that don't have sewer and water available to
Right.
them now, so that there's basically a blank slate. There's no roads, there's no sewer and water, there's just nothing to encumber that, so you can kind of take and create a development that makes sense with the lay of the land. There was wetlands out there, the wetlands, you can avoid those and move the development to a different portion of the property. It provides flexibility. Sometimes there's density rewards for doing certain things, so that
Absolutely.
if the density was, say, well, like our ordinance right now, it's roughly 4.5 units per acre because of the 10,000 square foot requirement. It might allow 6 units per acre if you went through this process and did all these things that were spelled out as part of the planning process. I mean, there's a number of them that have been done in the county. Probably the most that have been done in the county have been some of the old resort conversions where they had cabins that were sold off as condos, but or individual units, but the remaining portion of the property stayed in common ownership, and there was a centralized sewer system. You know, kind of the idea in the county is that you could centralize your utilities.
So does that make sense for the east end of our
Maybe.
city?
It could. I mean, there's
Or the north.
some there's
Yeah.
Or
lar-
the north?
So
Lot
we
of
just,
the other big pieces.
we just like, can we do that? Like, I want to build a 6-story apartment building and put a lot of dense one spot, one sewer line right up to it and out, and is that what we're talking about?
Well, I wouldn't say it,
Probably not the 6-story, but everything else about it, yes.
but you could make smaller parcels in a planned unit development. You might have a parcel that goes along with the unit that is no more than just an area 5 feet outside the perimeter of that unit, and the rest of the land then would be held in common with all the owners. And probably the best example in the county I can think of is down at the Mink Ranch down in Lutzen. It was a development that was designed 15 years
Right.
ago, 20 years ago, to be an affordable housing project. The homes were built, there were 960 square foot homes built on.
But the septic was already there, is paid for,
There's
you buy the house.
Centralized septic
Yeah.
system, centralized well, one loop road, all the homes went off of it. But in that area, I think the zoning requirement was that they had to have 5-acre lots. Well, you can't, you start building homes on 5-acre lots, you have to build your own septic systems. They kind of shared that cost, and so that was how planned unit development worked down there. Could work in the city, could, but with these standards, it likely only
Yeah,
going to
so
work in
obviously that needs
far-
to be looked at.
the far reaches of the city out in some of those that stuff kind of south of County Road 7, might be out on its own utilities,
That brings its own
own
complications.
sewer and water, and
Yeah, and I think at this point, we're not advocating that that's, a major tool to do what you want to do, but looking at it as it is, it doesn't seem like it's helping, or a tool for getting, because you're not using it, so,
haven't been used at all for
Yeah.
either for one of these new developments outside of town, or to do something with the strategy with an existing.
yeah. So it may be part of the solutions that we come up with, or it may not, because we might decide that it's not an important thing. But those regulations right now are not helpful.
It's not a tool for anybody.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
a tool for us, it's not a tool for a developer
Yep.
to really, focus on.
All right, so that's what we have so far for preliminary findings based on the data that we've seen and looking at the city's regulations. And we haven't done the full regulation review, but as Mike said, for us to move to the next step, I think what we want to do is have you react to the data that you've seen tonight. And, this is just the beginning of this conversation, but if there's things you can identify that you think we should focus on and issues that you think we should start to focus on based on what we're seeing on the maps and in the numbers and the vacant land.
And I know all 4 of those bullet points we've kind of salted into this entire evening.
Conversation, yeah, yeah.
So if you want to revisit any of that, or if you want to add anything to that conversation.
Or if you have light bulbs that
Yeah.
are coming up saying, I think one of the things we really need to talk about is this, and our focus on is this. That would be helpful for us to hear that at this stage.
So when you suggested we were going to put some questions, are you expecting we're actually going to be, you know,
I don't know if we,
do that, or is that?
I'm not sure, because, you know, if we hadn't already come up with 8 or 9 or 10 things, then maybe this would be the time we do that in just kind of a clustered fashion. But if there's not 8 or 9 or 10 new, fresh things we want to write on a piece of paper, I don't know that we have to. So if somebody wants to talk about a housing issue or just bring it up for a future conversation, let's do it.
Well, I mean, I think we looked at a lot of data and information, and I'm wondering what kind of message, you know, you feel like you're getting from us in terms of sending you away to do more work. At this point, it seems like we need to give you some ideas, or at least some thoughts in terms of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and how we see it. There might be some ways to move towards that.
Well, so I think, you know, one of the key things we looked at was the comp plan, and that identified, you know, a range of things related to housing. I mean, it was affordable, it was upper end housing with views, it was, you know, housing for seasonal employees. And I could pull that out, but, you know, that has a range of things that you're looking for. So if those are all, you know, if we just move forward with addressing all those, or if you feel like, you know, vacant land, there's not enough vacant land guided appropriately, or...
Well, that's one of my thoughts, is that properly zoned vacant land seems to be an impediment for residential type development. And we've seen that with the senior housing, you know, work that they did, that they were looking at properties that weren't necessarily zoned for that purpose, but seemed to be the only reasonable properties to be used for that purpose. Maybe we need to kind of reassess the zoning map and how that represents our interest in trying to provide affordable housing. I mean, there's a couple areas that I know that have been talked about that right now wouldn't allow residential use. I mean, one area has been that area inside the horseshoe of the Gunflint Trail, where sewer and water service is closely available.
Up in this area?
Or at least water services,
But even
to the west.
The gray
stuff.
left of
Right
that,
there, yeah, right there. It's in a the parkland or whatever,
That's the zone.
what is it? Yeah. There's no provision for allowing residential uses in that zone
So it's
district.
city-
But there's
is it
sewer
city
and water.
owned?
So is that what do we need a map that shows this
Well-
is close enough that it would make sense to turn that
I think
to?
that's a really smart way you're talking about. Is like, where are these potential areas that maybe they need a reclassification that could be reasonably used for residential housing? You know, yeah, I think that's.
I mean, sewer and water is available in Preachville. You know, it's across the road.
And residential single family or residential multifamily or resident?
Well, I think that's even
Yeah.
a more detailed conversation, but just to identify parcels that seem to have the potential for being used for residential purposes, that would have access to sewer and water services. And the other area is that area south of the city ditch, across from law enforcement in the business park.
Yeah.
You know, that sewer and water service available there? Have
So
potential?
you're just looking for decent sized, served with utilities, pieces of property that could be developed residentially.
I mean, to me, this is low-hanging fruit. I mean, you have, road access to the property, sewer and water service near the property, and, I mean, developers are still gonna have to extend services, but you don't have to create a whole new
Yeah.
line of services. I mean, we've talked about the old Tom Tabota property that, Public Works garage is on. That has a potential. It's sewer and water service on the highway. It's not zoned for residential, but would that be a potential location for housing to take place? And I would probably think that it wouldn't be for all types of housing, but maybe for some higher density apartment type style housing, that might be a good location, relatively close proximity to downtown,
This sounds like we could set some rules and some goals and have a group of people do this map exercise in pretty short order and come up with a list. And I would actually think it'd be better for us to do that than for
Yes.
them to do that.
Right.
but I'm thinking in terms of, if we're trying to accomplish providing a means to develop affordable housing in the community, then we need to look at, what are ways that we can help facilitate that. I mean, some of the information here is, I think, helpful just in terms of data gathering. I had no idea whether there was 700 housing units in the city, or properties, or what
Properties,
housing,
yeah.
housing,
Yeah.
So, I would have guessed.
Can the city build and own and rent properties? Can the city be a landlord? Can you have municipal? I mean, if you're looking for expediting things and managing
I
and
don't-
providing, can you do that?
I don't know if it would. We can. That whether it be the EDA or us, somebody's got housing authority to do that. Whether or not that would expedite or,
I mean, is
or
there
make
land
it better
that-
managed, I don't know.
I don't think the city, would want to be in the housing development business. I just
We're
not-
certainly not equipped for
Yeah,
it
we're
right
not,
now.
we're not skilled at that, but I'm thinking back to some of the, like the Grand Marais apartments or the Harborview apartments that were developed. There was a housing authority that worked to get those projects
Okay.
built. And that housing authority, statutory authority, I don't know if it falls now with the EDA or if it.
That's where it needs to live eventually. if
Does
it
the
hasn't
city
already.
does the city have land that we could say okay, yes, you can have this for $1, go develop this.
Well, those three
Well,
parcels
yeah,
I talked about
absolutely.
are all
Okay.
publicly owned parcels,
Which ones were those?
The one in the horseshoe of the Gunflint,
Okay,
the one over by the business park across from law enforcement,
okay,
and the one at the Public Works garage.
okay.
Those are all publicly owned.
Got it.
Publicly owned.
So those are prime places.
We've actually offered the one across the law enforcement to a developer for $1 to build assisted living.
Got it.
And that didn't happen. So
Okay.
yeah, we can do that.
Okay, well,
I mean, put
appreciate
that on the list of ways to increase our housing supply. We can change our zoning rules. We can find some subject properties that we own and try to be the developer or find a developer.
Or at least,
And,
or at least acquire the land
yeah,
so that it's available.
we can look for other, suitable places and then try to get them set up for a developer. We can enable smaller projects with either zoning rules or financing or something so that we don't need a developer and we can all be developers. There's a million ways to go at it. And that's kind of what the next step is to try and get all those stuck up on a wall somewhere or go through some process where we can get a bigger list of how can we attack this idea of increasing our housing supply and pick the ones we think are feasible and we're interested in.
Yeah, so you did did you a developer's RFP for this? Is that what the city did?
For this site here, yeah.
Yeah, so you could do that for housing too, right?
Sure.
If you had land,
Yeah,
you could do all the prep to say, we want this to be housing, and then try to
That's kind
get
of
developers to propose on it.
what EDA did with
The senior housing?
with the one roof affordable housing project. It wasn't so much an RFP as it was working. Well, I guess it was an RFP.
Mike, as we're throwing things out, you made the comment, like, that's something that we could do. What do you think that we should, is the next step for these guys? What do we want to ask them to do?
I don't know if we need to ask them. I mean, we've already got a scope of work with them.
Yeah.
Okay?
So this is more about if there is some direction you want to offer after seeing this.
Yeah,
This is
just
a good chance.
some
just as
priorities that you might have.
intermediary. And you've done that, everybody's used the word affordable tonight when they talked about housing, so it seems like that's pretty clearly an issue you want to see addressed. And you've talked about a few strategies, what if we do this, what if we do that, so I think that's good direction to offer. Because they can now go out and maybe polish up a few of those ideas, other places they've seen it done, or
Do you feel like you have enough information from us, Jeff?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And have you heard anything that you really didn't expect to hear, or anything that helps with
Well, I guess I'm kind of curious about the standards, the 10,000, the 75 for the current R1. That path of, how many existing properties actually meet those standards. The coverage maybe is in that same ballpark. And then, is there interest in a new zoning district for smaller lot homes so that you can do it? That it's clear that the city would accept those? Because the way the zoning is today, it would seem like it's
we
not
don't
what you
it.
want.
Yeah, and then people come and ask, and we've generally said yes. It's I don't know if we need a new zoning district, but in some way to evaluate where and under what circumstances we would find it attractive to have smaller lots.
Well, and I mean, we have seen residential zoning districts where there's different standards by housing type. So you could have an R1 that has small lot.
Yeah, kind
Detached
of what
homes.
Stacy was talking about. If it's this big, you can have this kind of development.
Yeah.
I think that setting up something like that might be really interesting to think about. And then it's not just about the number of units has to come into that equation too at some point. Because right now our zoning ordinance is not set up very well for that. So 10,000 square feet you can have a duplex.
Or an apartment building.
Or an apartment building. You can, with a conditional use permit.
Yeah.
And there is some language about, you can only have 2 units on 10,000 square feet, and then you need 2,000 square feet for each additional unit. But we just that isn't usable the
Yeah.
way it's written.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense to people, and what doesn't fit with the other rules that we have.
Yeah.
But some system like that ought to be created where we can say, how many units can I fit on this lot? What are the other services that I have to provide, whether it's parking or utilities or whatever, to enable more units on any particular lot. Because that's another way to do infill development. It's not just find a vacant lot and build on it. It's put an apartment on your garage, or put that garden shed gets a little bit bigger and get some facilities, and suddenly it's a housing unit.
Yeah. Yeah, so like Mike said, we have a scope that we can work from. And we'll look at precedents in other places too, so, things that other cities are doing to try to get even just the cost of housing that's built down, if there's a way just to do that. Sometimes cities have so many standards that it makes the cost of the housing go up. So,
I have to say, we don't have a lot of standards other than their zoning regulations, so we don't have a building code, and there's a lot of
So, but you, they have to go to the state building code directly?
No.
They don't?
No.
Well,
No building code.
We don't
enforcement.
enforce it. I mean, a contractor's licensure might require certain things.
Yeah, right, right.
Electrical code has to be, met, and the electrical inspector comes in, but there are no building inspections for any structure, well, I shouldn't say any structures, but for residential.
Have you seen any interest in things like, what, tiny homes or
Mhm.
Micro homes?
modular
Sure.
homes that are built off-site rather than stick-built?
Yeah, we've done them.
And the code seems to work okay with those?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. No, I think we have enough information to go on.
All right, well then you've all got one more piece of homework, which is bring a friend when we do our next session, which will take a little bit longer, and we'll try to get some real work done in. But we need a good team to help us.
Okay.
A friend that has an interest in affordable housing.
Well, it'd be great if they were a friend, but even more importantly, are they somebody that's got some sort of role to play in this conversation? An expert, or a partner, or a really smart person, or just, whatever. Longtime community member, some role in this conversation.
Are there local developers for housing?
Yeah, but not,
It's the custom housing mostly, or?
yeah, I mean, it's builders, right?
It's builders, yeah.
I think the only person I'd call a developer is Anton.
Yeah.
And thankfully, he's on the city council, so he's already invited.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming
Yeah,
up.
thanks
Appreciate
for
it, yeah.
Yep, sincerely.
One more piece of business for you all. The meeting in July is not that far from now. We don't have any public hearings scheduled.
Yeah.
I would recommend we skip it.
It's the day, it's the 3rd, I think, of July.
Yeah.
Okay.
And come back in August.
I'd be
And
comfortable
there'll
with that.
probably be, when we talk about the next step in this, it's not going to fit our first Wednesday. It's going to be special date anyway. So unless somebody's got something they absolutely want to put on the agenda, that's my recommendation.
Sounds fine to me.
Okay.
If there's no business, there's no reason to.
I mean, there's things we can talk about, but
Yeah.
letting this play out seems like a better strategy, and then we'll definitely have some work to do.
Okay.
So when is this next update?
When are we meeting again with our friends?
Unscheduled.
Yeah, we
Okay.
don't schedule it yet.
This 6 o'clock was a good time, just,
You like that?
yeah, so I can get done with work and,
Yeah.
Easier than 4 o'clock?
yep. Lot. For me.
Well, we
How
need
about-
you, so that's
How about
good.
your friends
Who's your friends?
that you're bringing?
I'll find somebody.
Awesome.
None of us have any friends, so.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Meeting adjourned.